Okay, so we'll be Mark 4, and as has been the pattern already with Mark, there's a lot of very quick movement. We skip his childhood, we jump right into the life of John the Baptist, and then in chapter 2 and 3, you jump right into the controversy of Jesus, that people are not liking the way he's going about doing things. But of course, it's hard to argue when he can heal people. It's hard to argue with him, even though they don't like that he's healing on the Sabbath. That's one of the primary ones. They don't like the method by which he's teaching as one who has authority. But chapter 4 then moves into primarily dealing with parables. Now, Mark, as in all things Mark, does not extensively deal with the parables. We're not going to deal with it to the same degree that Matthew and Luke do. But there is this chapter here dedicated to Jesus' parables. And it puts it within the context of Jesus teaching at the Cove of the Sower. This is a aerial view of that, and in a second we'll watch a video. I'm not sure if I don't see Jeremy here right now, which is unfortunate because I always like making him uncomfortable by playing videos of him, so he has to watch himself. But Appian Media, of which Jeremy is a part, does an excellent video that covers this particular geographic site, because in chapter 4 it begins with, "He began to teach again by the sea, and such a very large crowd gathered to him that he got into a boat in the sea and sat down, and the whole crowd was by the sea on the land." The sea that's being referred to there is the Sea of Galilee. And on the Sea of Galilee, in the geographical region that Jesus was at that point, this particular cove is pretty much, this is the spot. It kind of has to be, just due to the details given about it. So because of that, it's kind of a cool detail that you get to know where it was that he was teaching when he was explaining these parables. And they call it the Cove of the Sower because the primary parable that is taught there is the parable of the sower. So we'll take a minute here and watch a video. See if I can click it to make it start play. If not, I'll have Matt do it. Matt, can you make it say play? Maybe. It's not wanting to? I wonder if it cut that out because that security alert you were getting. So, okay. Well then, we're going to have to go ahead and just skip it and move on for now. I would recommend, if you just go look up Cove of the Sower, Appian Media, you will find that video. It's like 4 minutes. It doesn't take long to watch. But one of the aspects of it that is quite nice is the fact that it explains a logistical element of Jesus teaching so many people. The particular shape of that cove makes it a natural amphitheater. And so Jesus could be on the water in a boat, and he could speak in a voice, the same as I am right now, and people all the way up the top of that hill could hear him just fine. And so there's, that's one of the things that I think is beautiful about the Bible, is there's these questions that people bring up down the road. Wait a second, how could thousands of people actually hear him speak? They didn't have a microphone system. Well, God made a way. So as Jesus teaches here at the Cove of the Sower, it says in verse 2, he was teaching them many things in parables. And so then it will go into 3 parables specifically that Mark will cover: the parable of the sower, parable of the seed, and the parable of the mustard seed. And you'll notice all 3 of those have a seed element to them. When you are talking about parables, though, the biggest question is, why teach in parables? Why would Jesus teach in parables in the first place? What's his reasoning behind doing that? So there's one aspect for us, right? Is like if I tell you the parable of the sower, you're going to remember that because there's a story element to it. So there's one aspect for us that we find beneficial. Is that why Jesus taught? Got a hand there, and then I'll grab you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so you have these very memorable parables because they're stories, but then the average person who's only kind of listening or not digging deeper, they have ears to hear but do not hear, right? So they walk away saying, okay, good sermon, don't know what it's about, but good sermon. And that's another element to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so another aspect of parables, it's actually in the name itself. A parable is to throw something alongside. It's parable comes from parabolo. Bolo means to throw, and para is alongside. So you take a earthly thing, like agricultural elements that average person would be aware of, and you throw it alongside a spiritual thing, such as the kingdom of heaven is like. And that allows you to understand a spiritual concept through physical things. Yes? Mm-hmm. And? You're just going to stop right there? You're just going to say, oh, yeah, and he did, and... Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So we're going to go to Matthew 13, right? because you're right. With Jesus, he does explain, and a lot of his explanation, by the way, are the things that have already been brought up. And in Matthew 13, verse 10, it says the disciples came and they said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" Now, I would pause right there. His disciples say, "Why do you speak to them?" Right? So he's speaking to them, meaning not just the inner circle, not just the people who he's real close to, but all the crowds. Why do you speak to them in parables? And Jesus' answer is, to you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been granted. For whoever has, to him more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has shall be taken away from him. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, and while hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. And then he quotes from Isaiah, who will specifically talk about that idea of hearing and not understanding, and seeing and not perceiving, because their hearts are dull. There were twofold elements to it, right? To Jesus' disciples, it became a tool by which he could teach them things they would not understand otherwise, right? Because it does take an earthly thing and put it next to a heavenly thing. So you could take uneducated fishermen, of which that's one of the things that Jesus' enemies and the apostles' enemies would often refer to, is like, you guys don't even have an education. And it would allow him to teach these plain-spoken men who were men who worked with seeds and worked with fish and worked in normal society and life, spiritual concepts. While at the same time, as Matt pointed out, blinding people who were not willing to dig. what you'll notice in particular about the parable of the sower, and it shows up in the account in Mark as well as in the other ones, after Jesus tells the parable of the sower to the masses, his disciples come to him individually in a smaller group at a later time and say, what were you talking about, and could you explain that to us? And that is exactly what Jesus wanted to have happen. For people who were not really interested in following him, that blindness to the truth was okay with him. He was fine with that. But to those who wanted to know the truth and were willing to dig a little bit, he wanted to illuminate the word and illuminate these spiritual concepts. And that's a big deal. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. To teach us. Yeah, and it's the same thing today, right? Like, it's, if you start digging into the parables today, there's great riches of wisdom. If you want to just skim over it, you're going to really miss the value of it, but it's just as accessible today as it was then. So yeah, absolutely, all of those pieces. So as Jesus begins to teach in parables, you'll notice in Mark chapter 4, verse 3, the first thing he says is, listen to this. Behold, the sower went out to sow. He's going to, his desire is for people to listen, but he also recognizes that most people are not going to put the effort into it. Another kind of separate concept for us to think about is that God, this tells you something about the character of God. He wants you to have knowledge. He wants you to be transformed and renewed in your mind, but he also likes you to dig for the gems a little bit. That's part of the process. So if growing spiritually and study feels hard sometimes, it's because it is. It's meant to be something you have to churn over a little bit. That's kind of the nature of it. Okay, what's wrong with this picture? If we look at the parable of the sower, why is this a bad picture for the parable of the sower? When? Those seeds are on the top. Well, actually, the parable of the sower, the seeds actually would have started on the top too, but that's a good guess. Yeah? Okay, one that looks like just good soil. Yeah, that's another. We've only got one type of soil. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot more precision in the planting of the seed as well. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. We've only got one type of soil. We're doing it in a way that is, you might say, organized, right? Which is the way you would typically farm. Most parables, what you'll find is that there is some element of the parable that doesn't follow the standard rule of life. If you are a farmer, you understand the idea that seeds that go in good soil do better than seeds that go in bad soil. Which is why when farmers sow, they don't tend to just throw it out willy-nilly. There is a level of precision involved with that. That's typically on farms. You see rows, right? They're there for a reason. And yet in this parable, the sower is not doing that. And one aspect to think about with that is, it is to highlight that this seed is not like other seeds. In the parable of the sower, what's the seed? It's the Word. Yeah, it's the Word of God. The power in the Word is so mighty that the sower says, let's just throw it out everywhere. Right? We're just going to throw it out everywhere, and any soil that it falls on, it will have an opportunity for it to grow. That's the parable of the sower. So there is an element to this that if you were a farmer, you go, well, that's not how you do that, right? But I think that too is making you think. So he's casting out that seed. Yeah. Sure, push back a little bit. That's fair. It wasn't a mechanized process. You're right. I guess what I would say is you're not going to see a ton of it falling on the road. He's still going to be thoughtful about where he puts it. But you're right. It wouldn't have been a mechanized process like what we have today where it's the specific rows and things like that. Yes, so that's a fair point. If you look at the parable of the sower, the seed is the word of God. What's the soil? Yeah, it's the hearts of human beings, right? Hearts of human beings. So in the case of this, the seed is being put into the hearts of people. One of the things that's different about Jesus and his teachings from everything that you see in the world that we live in today, and when we talk about rulers today, and I say today, but really just rulers in general, earthly rulers. Earthly rulers are very interested in controlling behavior, right? You're in charge when people have to do what you say. What's Jesus interested in? The behavior is secondary. He's interested in the heart, right? His goal is the heart. He wants to get to the heart of people. And even in the teaching in parables, what's the whole point of the parable, right? He does want you to know, but what's he want you to do? He wants you to dig for it, which means a heartfelt effort, right? So everything about the way that Jesus is teaching, he's a different kind of king, right? He's not the kind of earthly ruler that generations have seen. He is one saying, what we want to talk about here is the heart. And in that parable of the sower, as you're looking at that heart, as you're casting out that seed, it comes and it falls on how many types of soil? You're going to have, we got four. We got the road, right? Right? And then we got the rocky soil. Then we got the soil with the thorns and the vines, right? And then we've got the good soil, right? Okay, so as he explains all of these things, down in verse 11, he's going to give us the explanation of it. He said to them, "Do you not understand this parable? How will you understand all the parables? The sower sows the word. These are the ones who are beside the road where the word is sown, and when they hear, immediately Satan comes and takes away the word which has been sown in them." So if you go to the parable, who takes away the seed on the road? In the parable. The birds. So who's the bird represent? Yeah. Who's taking in Jesus' explanation, who comes and takes away the word which has been sown? Satan. So the bird is Satan. So you see what Jesus is doing is saying, okay, different elements of this are representing spiritual things. Now, it's interesting to me that one of the things that we're told very early on is the way that one of the ways that Satan will get people to not let the word grow in their heart is to just not give it any time, right? If you have the seed that it falls on the road, it doesn't have time to grow, nor does it have you've got that harder soil, because the bird just sees it and comes and takes it away. What's an example of somebody or a type of situation that would match this, where somebody would have heard the word but doesn't understand it and Satan takes it away? Okay. Okay, so one, we just get distracted by life. And, we run a radio program here, right? So let's imagine somebody's driving down the road and they're flipping channels, and they hit on one of the sermons being played, and then all of a sudden something happens up ahead, or they catch the sermon at a boring part, which might happen, possibly, and they just change the channel. They get to work, and it was in and out, right? There is a sense in which if you don't meditate on the Word, it won't do any good, right? So something to consider for us is it's not just about ingesting the Word, but ingesting it in a way that gives us time to meditate on it. If there's a part of the Bible that you read and you don't understand, and then you just kind of move on and don't ever dig into that or seek answers, that gives Satan that opportunity just to grab it and go. So there's the first one in verse 16. In a similar way, these are the ones on whom seed was sown on the rocky places, who, when they hear the word, immediately receive it with joy, and they have no firm root in themselves, but are only temporary. Then when affliction or persecution arises because of the word, immediately they fall away. And so the other elements that we're told, so one is a lack of understanding. The other two things that can cause a problem for the seed, he mentions them right there in verse 17. Two things arise: tribulation and persecution. Okay, what's the difference, by the way, between tribulation and persecution? They are two different words. What's the difference? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So tribulation can just be any sort of trouble, right? Any sort of difficult thing that happens in life can cause you to derail your faith, right? But persecution is specifically trouble that comes along as pushback to you trying to live your faith, right? So you try and live more honestly, and you get some pushback. You try and make some more ethical decisions than what you were doing, and you get some pushback. And so this often is the case where, look, when you first hear the gospel, you think about the groups of people that were coming to hear Jesus. And they were a motley crew, right? That was one of the things that Jesus was given a hard time about, was that he would accept the tax collectors and the sinners. Well, they come and they hear Jesus and they receive his word with joy, and then they go back to their old lives and they start trying to live a different life. If you're a prostitute and you decide all of a sudden that you're going to start living a different life, any chance you're going to get any pushback? That your life currently is not aligned with biblical principles and you're going to try and make that change. Or if you're a tax collector that was known for stealing money from people. Not all tax collectors did, but that was certainly a reputation that they had. And all of a sudden now, and by the way, there are tax collectors and there are chief tax collectors. So if you're a tax collector, you might be working under a chief tax collector who's used to you breaking a couple of legs to get that extra money, and now you're not willing to do it. You're going to get any pushback. Right? So there's the difference. So tribulation is just hard things happen. Persecution is hard things happen because you try and live out the stuff that Jesus told you to live. And so there is one of the biblical models that we're told is we need to understand for ourselves, and also as we talk to people, that the idea of following Jesus, it sounds like a lot of joy, and there is joy to be had, but what often comes next is hardship. And if somebody thinks, the moment I become a Christian, it all gets easier, we've sold them a bill of goods. And as soon as it gets hard, they think, well, this isn't what Christianity, this isn't what I signed up for, and they leave. Jesus did the exact opposite. Jesus would tell people, take up your cross and follow after me. It was very clear. The biblical approach to living will not make your life easier here. It will make you better. It'll better equip you for life. There is a joy that can't be stolen from you, but don't think it's always going to be, unicorns and rainbows. And so, one, a lack of understanding can snatch the word from you, affliction or persecution. Then verse 18, and the others are the ones on whom seed was sown among the thorns, and these are the ones who have heard the word, but the worries of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desire for other things enter in and choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. So here we're given 3 more things that can cause the word to not bear fruit. Now, the interesting thing is, as you progress, you kind of are getting a little bit further progress in growth. The seed that fell on the road really doesn't germinate at all, right? The seed that falls in the rocky soil, it does okay for a little bit, and then it burns out. The seed that falls amongst the thorns, it seems to grow okay, but then it gets choked out and doesn't bear fruit. So we're seeing this progress, but none of them are actually bearing fruit. So what chokes out, if you were to take the 3 things? Yeah. It's a good point. Yes. Yeah, afflictions and persecutions are external sources, right? Like something happened to you. But these 3 things, right? We've got the worries of the world. Who's doing the worrying? That's me, right? The deceitfulness of riches. Well, the riches is external, but who's being deceived? Me, right? And the desire for other things. The other things are external, but who has the desire? Me, right? So it is, you're right. This is more of an internal thing that keeps it from bearing fruit. All of the opportunity for growth exists, but now all of a sudden I've allowed my worry, my ability to be deceived by the shiny things of this earth, and my desire just for other things. Other things are more important to me, to stop it from bearing fruit, right? And we probably, if you've ever tried your hand at gardening, I think there are a select few of you who are wonderful gardeners and are dedicated, and you will grow stuff. But what has typically been the habit in my family is our kids will learn something about growing things, and they'll be like, we want to grow some stuff. We're like, okay, so it starts out basically the same every single time, which is we go down to the store, everybody picks out a packet of seeds, we plant it, and then there's no watering that happens, and it gets left outside, and the next thing I know, it gets, some kid kicked it off the edge of the deck, and it's just like life happened. And it wasn't that they didn't want it to grow. In fact, probably a month and a half later, they'll look at me accusatorily, like, why didn't this grow? Like I was the one that wasn't watering it. They wanted the growth, they just didn't want it bad enough. They didn't want it enough to be diligent. And that's the risk of the thorns, is how do you get rid of all of that other stuff, right? The thorns and the thistles. If you're a farmer, how do you get rid of the thorns and the thistles? You got to weed them, right? You got to pull them out. You've got to understand that that's got to come out of your garden. That's got to be removed. And that's an active decision on your part to say, okay, I will not let the worries of the world keep me from what I care about. I will not be deceived by riches, and I will not let my desire for other things get me off point. That make sense? Okay, then the last thing, of course, then is, and verse 20, and those are the ones on whom the seed was sown on the good soil, and they hear the word, and they accept it, and they bear fruit 30, 60, and 100-fold. One element of the parable of the sower is, do you know how much fruit you're going to bear? No. And it doesn't really matter from a salvation standpoint, right? Some are going to bear 30, some 60, some 100. It's very similar to the parable of the talents. The 1-talent guy, the 2-talent guy, and the 5-talent guy. The problem with the 1-talent guy was not that he was a 1-talent guy, it's that he did what? Yeah, he buried it. He did nothing with it. That's the problem. If he had had 1 talent and then used it to make 1 more talent, that would have been fine. So you don't know what fruit you will bear for the Lord. It's just your job to be good soil. The other thing that's odd about this parable is, in real life, soil doesn't get to choose what soil it is. Right? In real life, soil is whatever soil is. But in this parable, you get a choice. You get to decide the quality of soil that you're going to be. And that only comes out in Jesus' explanation of it. Any comments or questions or anything like that? Yeah. Well, there is one aspect of, like, because they couldn't always directly understand, it made it hard to arrest them. There will be some parables, like the parable of the vineyard keeper that he tells, that is directly giving the Pharisees a hard time. But actually, even they, in that case, they understood it. Now, they couldn't do anything with him at the time because the crowds loved him. I would say that it wasn't as much about him staying out of trouble as it was making it so that those who didn't genuinely want to hear wouldn't. And those who did would dig deeper. Because in terms of keeping him out of trouble, I'm not sure that him telling things in parables did that very well, to be honest with you. But this is kind of my take on it. But there are, like, this parable wouldn't have gotten him in any trouble if he just explained it. But the other ones, like the parable of the vineyard keeper, it would have, but they kind of understood he was talking about them anyways. And so, ironically, they didn't understand it except for the part that made them look bad. So, any other comments or questions? Okay. Let's see here. The next one here is verse 26. This is the parable of the seed. The kingdom of God is like a man who casts seed upon the soil. One aspect to this here is that in the parable of the sower, he does not specifically mention the kingdom, but he does in the parable of the seed. The kingdom of God is like a man who casts seed upon the soil, and he goes to bed at night and he gets up by day, and the seed sprouts and grows, how he himself does not know. And the soil produces crops by itself, first the blade, then the head, then the mature grain in the head. But when the crop permits, he immediately puts in the sickle because the harvest has come. Okay, so let's talk about the man who does the planting here. In this case, what do we know about him? What are some character traits in the parable of the seed of the farmer that were given? Okay, so he does plant, right? But then, when he's done planting, he goes to bed at night, right? So it specifically mentions this idea. He goes to bed at night, and then he gets up by day. In other words, he casts the seed down, he plants it, goes to bed. I've done my part. That's one aspect. What's another thing that's mentioned about him specifically? Okay, so he benefits from it, right? So when it shows up, he reaps the harvest of it. So here's a guy, he plants, and then the seed does its work. But when it's done doing its work, he does, when the crop permits, as it said, he puts in the sickle, and it says he immediately does so, right? So he's going to take advantage of the harvest that comes from it. One other thing that's mentioned. He doesn't understand it. So here's a guy, his entire living is based off of this seed, right? If you're a farmer, your whole life is wrapped up in that seed. No seeds, no living. He plants the seed, then he goes to bed. While he's sleeping, he's not doing any work. In fact, if he stayed up all night, he stayed up all night and just watched the dirt, would it make any difference? No. Does he know how seeds work? Not really. He doesn't understand it at all. Interestingly, we basically are in the same spot now. Now, there are some more details that we understand about the germination process now than they did back then. But the truth of the matter is that there is still a lot of mystery locked up in how plants grow. Lots and lots of stuff that we don't know. What we don't know far outweighs what we do know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And what's interesting to me about this parable is we take the word faith and we make it a religious thing. Faith is always associated with religion. When we talk about, do you have faith? But the farmer is not, he could be an atheist farmer, right? And if you have an atheist and he's a farmer, he's going to do the exact same thing. He's going to plant the seed, and then he's going to go to bed at night, and he's not going to really know exactly how that seed grows, but when the harvest comes, he's definitely going to reap it. Faith is, I don't understand everything, but what I do have evidence of tells me I should trust the process. Now, when you talk about Jesus, do you know everything about Jesus? Do you know everything about heaven? In fact, if we had a class, and the class was just ask Scott stuff about heaven, I could just answer 99.99% of it by saying, I don't know. Right? It would be a really easy class for me to prepare for. But we know enough to know we should plant the seed and trust the process and reap the harvest. And this is one of those aspects of being a Christian that he's talking about. This is what the kingdom's like. We are citizens of that kingdom. And there's a lot of times that you're going to be doing things in the way that you run your marriage, in the way that you raise your kids, in the way that you live your life with your neighbor, in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with other people. You go, I don't even know if that made any difference. Guess what? You don't have to know. You don't have to see it make a difference. You ever have a talk with your kid about spiritual things and then wonder if it went in one ear and out the other? Yeah, that's all the time. All the time. So is it working or not? I don't know. Go to bed at night. You just live the life. And you let the seed do its job. And it will reap a harvest. And so Jesus is pointing out that an aspect of the way that the kingdom grows is hard to understand. If Rome wants to grow, if the Roman Empire wants to grow, how do they grow? They're going to tax, raise some taxes, then they're going to pay some soldiers, and then they're going to go fight somebody else and take their land. That's how the Roman Empire grows, right? It's a very straightforward process. And you know whether it's growing or not based off of whether the taxes got collected, whether the army is bigger, and whether they've actually been winning battles. How about the church? At any given moment, could you tell me whether the church is growing or shrinking here on earth? I couldn't tell you. I mean, we live in this big world. Where's the boundaries of the church? Jesus actually tells us where the boundaries are. Where's the kingdom exist? It's in that soil. Human hearts. So how do you quantify that? So you see the problem? How big is the church at any given moment? You can't quantify it. Good luck. But if I look from 33 AD, when Jesus died on the cross, to today, has the church, has the kingdom, has it grown? Yeah, see, that's pretty obvious, right? From the day of Pentecost, when there's 3,000, to today, there are more than 3,000 in the kingdom. That one I can go, yep, it's okay. So if I look long over time, you can tell. But the nature of Christianity is much more like farming than it is like land acquisition for a Roman Empire. And so Jesus lays out that idea. And then he points to it again in the next parable, and this is where we'll close out, in the parable of the mustard seed. You have that mustard seed, and it's just a super tiny little seed, right? But then it grows, and eventually it becomes the largest tree in the field, and it becomes a source of protection for the birds of the air, and it's larger than all the garden plants, and it's got these large branches, and the birds of the air, they come and nest under its shade. In other words, it becomes beneficial to everybody. But how did it start out? Tiny little thing, right? Now, go back to the last parable. How does that tiny little seed turn into a giant mustard tree? Last parable told you how. I don't know. That's what it says. I don't know, right? But it does. And so what Jesus is saying is that his kingdom will not grow like other kingdoms, which also means he's not going to be a king like other kings, right? And his kingdom isn't growing. It's not growing in the manner that people are used to kingdoms growing. He's not being king like the kings that they're used to seeing. And where are the boundaries of his kingdom? What's he care about? Hearts of men. Different king. Mark is laying out that in every way, Jesus is not who you expected. These parables are handpicked to highlight that difference. And to emphasize the kind of kingdom and the kind of king that he's going to be. Okay, anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, both sides of that equation. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much.